I think that's such a great segue into today's topic, when and how to break up with a prospect. If you're like most fundraisers, there are not enough hours in the day, right? So we have to be very intentional with our time. And if we are spending inordinate amounts of time on prospects who may not be our best prospects, is that really the best use of our time? We're going to unpack that a bit today. So next slide, please, Trish. Want to go over just some a brief agenda for the day so you sort of know where we're headed with this. First, going to talk about why it's hard to drop a prospect. Then we're going to talk about and it is important to let go. So how do we do that, right? Then we're going to have some best practice indicators on when to move on. We're going to look at a couple of exemplary major gift prospects and what that might look like, right? And then we're going to talk about best practices on how to disqualify a prospect and some tips for holding yourself accountable moving forward. So let's dive right in on why is it hard to drop a prospect, right? We've either been there or seen it, right? How many of you have a portfolio that's way too large for you to actually have a meaningful relationship, right? If you come to the end of your year and you have 200 people in your portfolio, it's probably too many people that you can spend meaningful time engaging with, right? So it might be time to pare that list down a bit. Even if you spend 100% of your time, that's just too many to manage for one person effectively over the course of a year. Often prospects are held onto because we're really hesitant to move them, thinking like, where are they going to go next, right? If we don't keep them in our portfolio, we might forget about them. I think equally, like, even if you haven't personally experienced this, you may be just starting out and be like, wow, that would be an amazing problem to have 200 prospects in my portfolio. I'm looking to get 10 right now. Like I'm starting out and I want a few. Just think about it this way. You've probably sat in a meeting with a staff member or a volunteer that keeps talking about this person that should give and keeps on talking about them, and yet they're not making progress, right? Over and over and over again. Is that an effective use of the group's time, the individual's time? Jury's out on that one, right? So we've either been there or we've seen it. So next, let's talk a little bit about why it's hard to drop them, right? Thinking about, is there a clear next step, right? If it feels like there's nowhere for them to go, if they're not actively in your portfolio, sometimes we just keep them there because we're not wanting to neglect them or forget about them. And we just kind of think, okay, but there's still potential. It might just be a not right now, right? But we want to make sure that in order to have meaningful stewardship, we should have an overall plan and we really should keep our best prospects top of mind. And then maybe the others should be moved into another category, right? It can be tough because we have an emotional and time invested, right? We may think that this was our best prospect. We had something that indicated that this prospect was going to be someone that checked all those boxes, right? They've got an ability to do something. I think they're inclined. They've had a recent experience. They should be a perfect prospect. And I believe that I have access to them, right? We look at those things. And yet, sometimes it's just not a right fit, right? We don't want to feel like we have failed. We don't want to feel like we've wasted our time. If we've spent lots of touches already, it can feel like we're giving up. And I don't know about you, but I don't like to give up. I like to have that positive outlook at all times. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that like that emotional investment of time can sometimes make it difficult for us to say, you know what, this is going to have to move elsewhere, and we're going to have to move on if we're going to be effective and we're going to spend the best use of our time. External pressures, right? A board member may be advocating for this prospect. I have been in meetings where committees are very like excited about a prospect and they think they have the ability, they have the inclination, but yet they can't really help us get to access to them. Celebrities are common ones for this, right? They'll be like, oh, so-and-so's from our hometown. They should be on the prospect list. And we're like, great, who has their cell phone? And no one does, right? But we're feeling that pressure that we've got to keep them on the list because just maybe somebody will show up with that, right? But it can bog us down in our time. Leadership might be saying, they should be giving more. And we have this pressure, right? Because maybe they're giving to another organization, or people just think they should give more. And yet, it may not be the best use of our time. So, moving on to the next slide. How do we act in the prospect and the organization's best interest, right? I think we have to be so intentional with our work, and we have to remember that trust is the most important thing in this line of work, right? So we have to know when to step back because that preserves trust and it gives us future credibility, right? We want to keep that relationship open. We don't want to completely turn someone off. People ask me all the time, how do you do this line of work? How do you ask people for money? And I'm like, so few of the steps of what we do are actually asking someone for money, but we're very, very delicately managing relationships. And we don't want every touch point to be one where people are like, oh, here comes Marty, and they want to run the other way, right? You have to preserve that trust. You definitely don't want to burn bridges for either yourself and your own personal connection or the organization's relationship. And sometimes enough is enough already. If we've made enough contacts, like we could irritate someone. We've got to uphold that strong reputation. We want to be firm, consistent, varied in our approach. I oftentimes will say, look, I follow up. That's what I do. That's something that's important for us to get this work done. But if at ever a point you are just not ready or don't want to have this conversation, you need to let me know because I'm going to be the person to follow up so we can find success and have impact. Um, but if someone says, hey, stop, we might not be upholding that reputation. We want to say what we do and do what we say, right? So that is an important thing to keep in mind. Next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about some of those indicators of when it may be time to move on. Because all this sounds great, Marty, but how do I actually know when enough is enough, right? Because there's just like, what if the next time it works, right? So if someone has explicitly stated that now is not the right time or they're not interested in connecting, we've got to respect that, right? If we say, oh, but they just don't know. I got to send them a little more information. I'm sure if they just knew this, right? No, if they say now is not the right time, then perhaps we ask the question, maybe when would be a better time? Would you like me to circle back at the end of the year? Ask questions, come up with a follow-up that may be appropriate if you're able to do that. But if they've just kind of been like, no, let's respect that, right? If they've completely ignored 7 or more varied personalized outreach attempts in the last 12 months, that is a pretty strong indicator that they're not interested right now, and we should maybe move them out of our best prospects list and put them into a low touch type of stewardship, right? If they've indicated that your organization doesn't fit their philanthropic priorities, while we want to respect that always, we also sometimes might hang on to them and say, but they maybe just don't know. We have to sort of have another chance to tell them. If they have said that and we need to back off a little bit, we may move them to a lower touch sort of stewardship to hopefully try to build that connection for a future, right? But they may not be our best prospect and they may need to be someone that we're taking a break from. So next, Michaela's going to unpack a couple of scenarios where we're going to decide, should we keep them or should we drop them?
Thank you, Marty. Yeah, so I appreciate you going over what indicators we should be looking for when we're engaging with a prospect. And I encourage you all to kind of think, I'm going to read through a scenario and I'm going to pick on Marty a little bit in fun. And we're going to try to decide together if we should drop Marty as a prospect right now, or if we should shift our strategy and what that might look like. So here's the situation. Marty is a 6-figure prospect. She's delightful. I've emailed her 3 times, and these are the types of emails I sent. Marty gave a $5,000 gift, so of course I immediately followed up and said, thank you, we really appreciate you. I happen to know that Marty has capacity for more, but I wanted to start with that stewardship touch point first. Then I followed up a couple weeks later with another email asking, I'd love to hear more about what inspired your gift and love to meet you. Talk about, what interests you at our organization. I didn't hear back from Marty on that one. Okay, so I tried to shift a little bit. I emailed her this third time to invite her to a cultivation event. Now, here's the thing. At my organization, have already put out a survey asking our donors, how they want to interact with us. And Marty told me in that survey that this is the best email address for me, and this is how I want to engage with you. So that's why I'm emailing. I know that the emails haven't bounced because we have access to this information at our organization. We can see when somebody opens an email, Marty's been opening them. And I see Marty often. We live in the same community. The other day at the grocery store, we ran into each other and I just, got to chatting and I tried to bring up the possibility of meeting and Marty shifted the conversation pretty quickly. So should I drop Marty as a prospect? Thinking about those indicators that Marty talked through in just a little bit ago, I'm curious, drop in the chat what you think we should do. Louise, I'm going to pick on you. Lisa's like, oh no. Louise, what do you think we should do with Marty?
I was typing.
Oh, you were? Sorry.
It's
I
okay.
should have been patient.
No, it's okay. I said bye, Marty. But I would maybe take a break and give her a little space for a while and then maybe try to come back later.
Yeah.
She seems
Well,
like
thanks,
she's sending
Louise.
some messages. You're welcome.
I appreciate you you guys. I love Louise so much. I appreciate you letting me pick on you. So one thing I really like that Louise just said is giving Marty space. I never shared what my cadence really was in following up with an event. Remember, Marty's top priority in life, even though she's a very generous donor, is not my organization. But I might challenge you a little bit, Louise. I'm not going to drop Marty yet. And here's why. Thinking back on the indicators, she hasn't explicitly told me she doesn't want to connect yet. I might just not be reaching her in the way that she actually wants to connect with me. She said she wants email, but here she is not responding. One of the most powerful things we can utilize in our work is peer-to-peer engagement. And I haven't yet brought in another fundraising volunteer or a board member, or maybe even another donor that is friends with Marty or knows Marty. They don't have to be best friends. That's my first strategy. And seeing maybe Marty is just a little nervous to meet one-on-one with me. I mean, she just gave a gift. Maybe she thinks I'm going to ask her right again, right? Another option is just shifting the dynamic a bit. Like I'm coming at Marty, but maybe changing my language and being thoughtful in my outreach. Pick up the phone, try that. If it doesn't work, okay, that's just one of the 7 touch points Blackbaud says we might need to engage before dropping a prospect. Asking Marty, what time works best for you? I'd like to know more about your interest, shifting that so that she's got ownership over the conversation and she's got a better idea of what it is that I'm asking her for. Does that make sense? So I'm going to keep Marty and I'm going to try a few more times before I give up because she's a great prospect. Okay, the next one is Jared. I'm going to pick on Jared now. So here's the scenario for Jared, and I'll be a little more patient. Y'all can put it in the chat and I'll wait for you to actually hit enter. Jared was invited to a cultivation event at our organization by his very close friends and actually one of our best fundraising volunteers. He was really engaged at the event, like asking all these questions. And I had the opportunity as the fundraiser just immediately in that moment ask him, well, would you meet with us and this fundraising volunteer and talk a little bit more? I'd like to know a little bit more about what your thoughts are specifically on how we're organizing this project. Jared was up for it. We got the meeting in the books the next week. I'm so excited. After the event, I picked up the phone, called this fundraising volunteer just to verify. I was like, I think we could ask Jared for a 100K gift. What do you think? The fundraising volunteer was like, absolutely. I think let's do it. Let's go for it. So we sit down in this meeting with Jared. We thought we're going to be making an ask because he was so engaged and really excited about the project. And then things shifted a little bit in this meeting. And Jared started sharing some pretty strong opinions and telling us, the financial model isn't really up to snuff for this particular project, and that he explicitly said to me he could not support the project because it wasn't done right. What should we do in this scenario? Thinking of those indicators that Marty talked about, should we drop Jared? Should we keep him going? I mean, he was interested, he took the meeting. What are your all's thoughts? I'm going to pick on Mary this time. Mary, what should we do with Jared? He's such a troublesome guy.
I say cut him loose.
Yeah, and
I mean,
going back,
he says we're not doing it right. Like
that's a challenge to overcome for sure. Oh, what did Ellen say here? Engage him by asking his feedback. What does he think needs to be changed? I really love that, Ellen. That's absolutely something that should be happening in that meeting. Learning more from Jared about what he needs to see or what he believes would look successful. I would actually, in fact, I'd marry what Ellen suggested here along with what Mary suggested. And I'm a pretty consistent person. I'm going to say, yes, I'm going to drop Jared, but for now, that was a great opportunity to connect with Jared, learn more about him. With Ellen's questioning, I learned more about what he needs to see in a project so that in the future, when something that's the right fit comes along, I've established this strong relationship with Jared and can come back to him with the appropriate fit. But I'm going to drop him as a major gift prospect for this particular project because he told me, going back to those indicators, he's not interested, right? And I want to respect that. I want to build a strong organizational reputation and instill trust with the volunteer that opened their network for us. I want to talk a little bit about this volunteer in particular because, I've followed up with Jared. I said, thank you so much for your feedback. We really appreciate your valuable insight. I'd love to keep you on our newsletter because, moving forward, we'd love to hear your thoughts about other projects. And of course, he was like, sure, thumbs up newsletter. That's easy peasy. But this volunteer might feel a little bummed, right? Because they were just as excited as I was going into this meeting. And I need to care for that volunteer relationship too. Tell them, I'm so thankful that you opened up your network. I'm so thankful that you quickly took this meeting with us and were willing to share your why in that meeting. And I just want to let you know that this isn't a failure. It's just a no for right now. And we can always come back to Jared or engage him in an even more appropriate fit in the future. Instill their confidence in that sometimes we get no's in this work, and that's okay. We'll just find another fit if it's appropriate moving forward. So care for that relationship with the volunteer as well. Okay, so we've talked through a couple scenarios, and I have to thank Marty and Jared for letting me pick on them, and Mary for giving us your insight. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Louise, for giving us your thoughts as well. Now, Mary is going to cover over how do we actually disqualify a prospect?
Thanks, Michaela. So yeah, whenever we're walking that fine line between being a prospect pack rat and maybe cutting bait a little too quickly, like what are the best things that we can do to help ourselves? Well, one thing, and this is not just a practice for when and how to drop a prospect, but it's to log everything in your CRM. This is important for a lot of reasons. I love a detailed CRM. But what it can do is help you deal with a lot of some of those internal and external pressures that we were talking about earlier that might make you feel compelled to hold on to a prospect. So if you're logging all of your attempted emails, attempted phone calls, trying to get a volunteer to help open that door, if you've got a list of that in your CRM, you can look at it reasonably. And if you've set the rule for yourself that I'm going to try 7 ways to get in touch with this person and it hasn't worked out, you've got the data in front of yourself to say, you know what? I need to move them somewhere else. Second, if you're dealing with that external pressure of someone on your board or maybe your boss who's saying, you know, you really should be able to get in front of this person. You really should be able to get them to give. They give so much everywhere else. You can show them the brass tacks of these are the attempts that I've made. What else, and ask the question, what else would you suggest for us to actually get in front of this person? Second, we don't want to burn any bridges. Here we're saying try for a soft exit. Honestly, if if Jared misses you as his punching bag, that might be the only time that someone has noticed whenever I have let them go into a lower touch cultivation strategy. So we don't want to flounce out of the relationship. You know, we're not going to announce that we're going to be leaving them alone. We may just move them to where they're getting the annual report, they're getting newsletters, they're getting included in the annual fund mailing. And then we're gonna in with that whole detailed CRM thing. If you'll create a tag in your CRM where you can make them a previous prospect, that'll make it so that you can tell quickly if they crop back up and they give to some sort of special appeal where they're included in a mailing. That might be an indicator for you that it's time to re-engage. However, if Jared has really gotten his nose out of joint and Jared tells you that he doesn't want to hear from you anymore, you've got to honor that. There can be legal and ethical implications attached to this, especially depending on state laws. But if he wants to go no contact, you got to figure out how to go no contact. If you work in a large organization, this can be somewhat complex, as there are oftentimes many different CRMs operating, and the marketing department may have a different one than the fundraising office does. And you've got to try and figure out how to chase that down, because if Jared really never wants to hear from you again, he doesn't want to hear from the marketing department, and he doesn't want to hear from fundraising. Next slide, please, Trish. Now, for holding yourself accountable, again, here we go. Track your actions in your CRM. Set your rules for yourself before you find yourself in this situation. If you're going to limit yourself to 7 tries with somebody before you let them go, then limit yourself to those 7 tries. You want to build strong engagement plans for both your donors and your prospects. And what I mean by this is that instead of holding on to them because you're afraid that if you shift them to a different strategy that they won't be well taken care of, you want to have a strategy in place that you trust, so that if you move them to that kind of lower touch group, you still know that they're getting good information at a good cadence, and that you can trust that if they're interested, they'll crop back up for you. Along with the reference to tagging them as a previous prospect from the previous slide, if you build in some sort of recent contributions review, you can actually you can automate this sort of report in your system, where maybe every couple weeks it just dumps into your inbox those individuals who have a previous prospect tag who made a gift in the last 2 weeks. That would be a time for you to do a little more investigation, see what it was that they gave to, and then reconsider. Maybe it's time for me to reach back out to this person again and move them back to a higher touch engagement plan. And finally, Figure out what the right volume of prospects is for you to manage. It might be 200 if you never sleep and don't go on vacations, but it's probably not. Think about what you can actively manage in a year. Having 50 well-managed prospects is a lot better than having 150 who only hear from you once a year. Ensure that if you add a prospect, you consider a prospect that's ready to be taken out. This is similar to the approach that some people take with their closets. You know, you buy a new piece of clothing, and that means that you're gonna let a piece of clothing go that you don't really wear that much. Think of your prospects similar to a wardrobe. If there's somebody who really isn't a great match, they really don't fit the organization, they're like that pants that you got on the clearance rack and they looked really cool, but they just don't ever seem to work with anything, it's okay. They'll find a fit for their philanthropy somewhere in their life and somewhere in your community. It just might not be with you. And finally, use the criteria that we covered earlier to help you make this decision. With that, I think I'd like to pass it back to Marty because we've got, option for questions. That's right. Anybody out there in the crowd have any questions about how to break up with a prospect?
I just want to say I really like that analogy of the pants, and I'm going to hang on to that.
I know I
Do
feel
your
like I need
donor
to go
sit.
clean my closet out now.
Well, if no one has any questions, I know we have some exciting events coming up.
Yes, thank you so much, Mary. And really quickly, if you would like to talk with us about scaling up your fundraising, go ahead and use that QR code. We'd love to talk to you for sure. So be on the lookout there. Also, I think that'll schedule some time on Jared's calendar so we can talk with you about how we might be able to help you if you're not already a client.